Hi.
Hello, Eduardo. Thank you very much for taking this time out to speak to us about yourself and your work. I want to talk mainly today about your latest project, Liber Domus. But first, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up being a games-based learning professional?
Yeah, so I've been working with gamification in training processes and training exercises for companies, for teams, and individuals for the past 3 or 4 years, and I've co-designed a few solutions in which we basically brought to the digital world some training exercises as well as some platforms that allowed for a sort of blended gamified solutions. In terms of when the pandemic hit, in terms of these types of solutions, we noticed that these weren't as motivating as it could be. So we noticed that professionals were rather bored very quickly. And so I started looking at solutions that were more engaging, more motivating. And quickly I started moving towards game-based learning instead of gamification. So not to turn away completely from gamification. I think it's very interesting in some aspects. But when it comes to training, and especially long-term training, which is mostly of what I was doing in the other company, it wasn't effective. It was effective for the first week, 2 weeks at most. Sometimes we'd see spikes, like if we introduce something new, we'd see a spike in activity, but afterwards it would be a very low level of activity and motivation throughout the rest of the course. And so I moved to game-based learning, and I started creating games on my own in 2D engines, like RPG Maker and Game Maker. All of these 2D game engines, which are quite easy to learn, and without a lot of programming skills, you can do a lot of good stuff. And I presented these solutions for the company, and they rejected them completely, saying that these were childish and inadequate for the workplace. And so it wasn't an immediate decision, and it wasn't just that made me move away. But with the pandemic, I think every one of us started questioning and started thinking about what we wanted to do with our lives, and if we wanted to be in a place and do something that wasn't fulfilling. And so I started talking with other people about game-based learning solutions and what type of impact it could have. And I ended up talking a lot with some researchers from the Polytechnic Institute of Porto. And that's one of the other things about the pandemic, is that all of a sudden you're talking in a Zoom meeting with someone who you've never met in your life in person. And they're perfectly okay with it, and they're perfectly fine, and they talk to you openly about everything. And in 2 weeks, I had a research project in one of the major universities in Portugal about bringing game-based learning for K-12. And so, yeah, things went from there to quitting my job and started focusing full-time on creating these games, and it's been quite a ride.
So just briefly, because some people use these terms interchangeably, what for you is the difference between gamification and games-based learning?
Well, for me, gamification, it's the use of any sort of game mechanisms. And I will be using the word mechanisms a lot because I haven't found anything else that can describe so well the variety of tools that a game has that can produce and can introduce to anyone who's playing. And so any mechanism of a game can be used for something that it isn't a game, either a service or a service that supports a product, like for example a shop, online shop, a service like a test, or any sort of learning. So it's normal that people confuse both terms, but the truth is gamification tends to get a bad rep because a lot of people think you can just use any sort of mechanism or a mixture of mechanisms, and things will be fun all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And they tend to go for those mechanisms which bring immediate satisfaction to the game. So usually games are composed of a mixture of mechanisms, and each genre has a mixture of mechanisms, and some are short-term and others are long-term motivators. So, for example, we have achievements in which a player, if he doesn't have a quest to do or something long-term, he will focus. Okay, it says here in the game I have to kill 20 enemies in less than 2 minutes to win the prize. Let's try. And he does that, and he gets a reward and an achievement, a badge saying that he was able to do that. And wonderful, hooray, it's great for like 5 minutes. And so people grab this because this is rather easy to implement technologically to other types of solutions, like, for example, websites or platforms. And so people usually do a lot of this in terms of gamification. At least that's my opinion. But there's also...
So would you say that then that gamification is where gamification is used in learning, for example, where single or maybe a few mechanisms are used on their own, but they don't constitute a game because there's no sort of flow of play. It's things like do this and you get a specific reward in the form of a badge or something. So it's very much just the mechanism on its own rather than it being part of the game.
Yeah, exactly. And I do have a very strict view of this, because I think what gamification does, and gamification can be used very well. For example, if you think about long-term motivators or intrinsic motivators, you have some game mechanisms, like, for example, story, or the use of adventures or quest systems, in which you have long-term objectives, or character customization, in which you set an objective for someone to grow or to evolve or to learn and to reach a certain character or a certain level. And if you combine that with a story, for example, you have a very strong motivator and you have wonderful gamification. And you can do that in anything, but that's the long road. So the short road, the one that's easy to implement and quick to produce results in the short term, it's those mechanisms I was mentioning, like achievements, rewards, badges, all of that. So that only helps in the short term. So gamification usually fails after a while. And that's what's been happening in education as well. For example, here in Portugal, and I'm sure that elsewhere in Europe, things are very, very much similar. You have like these learning platforms for e-learning that support school systems for autonomous learning at home. And here, for example, it's Escola Virtual, so virtual school. And this started as basically someone who grabbed the education manuals for each subject and placed them on the internet. And they evolved into bringing gamification into these systems. And research has been, they have been producing research regarding the impact of this gamification in terms of learning outcomes. And the results haven't been great. And that's because a student isn't more motivated to study just because he has an achievement. It might be interesting in the short term, like, yeah, okay, this is fun, this is interesting. Next week it won't. And so it becomes boring very quickly. And so I do believe game-based learning, and in that case, it has to be a real game. I think serious games, on the other hand, also get a bad rap because of how sometimes they forget about the fun element. And yeah, game-based learning is really hard to achieve in the full term of what it's supposed to mean, because you're usually either learning or having fun. At least that's the usual mindset. What we're trying to do is actually break that. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay, I'm just going to have to stop for a second because my laptop's actually getting quite low on power.
Okay.
Just one sec. So busy messing around with the camera earlier, I completely forgot to plug the laptop in. Right, sorry about that.
No worries.
So with regard to learning games, then you and your team have been working really hard on completing the prototype of Liber Domus, and you built it as the first 3D open world educational role-playing game. So can we just sort of unpick some of that a little bit? Obviously, we know what an educational game is, probably, but what is an open world role-playing game, and how does it differ from other types of RPG?
Well, what we've done was to basically look at research and look at what game mechanisms were more connected to bringing both extrinsic and intrinsic motivation into the study sessions. And we started looking at several RPG mechanisms, but not only. So what happened is that the closest we got in terms of classifying the game is an RPG. So what we have, first of all, it's a role-playing game in the sense that it has a lot of the RPG mechanisms. Like, for example, you're able to customize your character. As you move through the game and get, for example, new equipment, you can equip those items, and those will have changes in your stats and also in your aspect. And so that sort of customization, which is very typical in RPGs. We have a very deep connection to the story, to the narrative, and how, and so the game progresses through a quest system. So you have mandatory quests and optional quests. You have a very big interaction with the game world, which is also, again, very typical of the RPGs, but not only, also adventure games, action games. But we do have a larger connection with the characters and the dialogue with the characters. We believe that this has to do with the education mechanisms which are in place in the game. Let me go back a bit and rephrase this. What happens is we needed to have not only mechanisms that connected with the student who was learning, and we needed to create something that was something that the student wanted to play day in day, for a full year. And we started thinking as well how we could connect this with the education. And so, for example, there's a lot of subjects in which this is rather easy. For example, if we have a dialogue system and a quest system, it's very easy to create, to create a game in English or Portuguese or history, because you have a narrative, which is very easy to create. And then you interact with characters and interact with the game world. And dialogue is very important to create that connection and also to transmit knowledge. So obviously in these subjects, we create this, this game mechanism in particular is very important because dialogue will be the main way in which students will learn about something. And so we also created a backlog in which the student can access and roll back and see how the dialogue was before and get access to the knowledge as well. And so
the open world aspect.
Sorry.
Is that to do with the fact that they can explore as they like, rather than it being a linear kind of experience?
Yes, exactly. So what happens is that in adventure systems, you usually have a lot of quests, and these have to be done in a certain linear aspect. So you have to move forward. To reach another quest, you have to do another one before, or two others before. What we've done is that we maintain that, obviously, because every RPG has to have a very strong story behind. And so we obviously have some mandatory quests, which have to be done eventually. And not necessarily through a specific order. And so what we have is we branched the narrative into three points. Three aspects of the story, which focus on three different subjects of mathematics. And also we've added additional quests. And so through a reputation system and through skills in which the character can also progress and evolve. And through these quests, the student eventually reaches a stage in which he completes the quests necessary to move forward with the story, and then he will reach the only part which is probably not as open world in terms of story, which is the last part of the game for revision. So basically it's like a massive quest in which they review all of the
everything.
Exactly. But the game will always be explorable. So if the student just wants to go somewhere and talk to someone or explore a bit of the map, he can do it. The game engine allows him to do it. We will narrow it down a bit in the beginning for tutorial purposes, so that the student doesn't get too lost in the beginning. But afterwards, we'll completely open the game. And if he wants to spend 1 hour just traveling from one place to another, he's more than welcome to.
That's really exciting. It reminds me of Daggerfall. I still think that Daggerfall is the best of the Elder Scrolls. I mean, the ones that came after, they had beautiful graphics and all that, but Daggerfall, I still play it. The whole idea that you could literally start off walking across the map and just walk around this massive world, it was just so exciting. I remember
it was very buggy, but I do remember it as my first RPG as well.
I loved it, and I still do.
I was still wondering, like, I can do this.
I mean, I like the I'm digressing somewhat, sorry, I'll come back to the subject in a minute. The idea that you can make your own spells by piling up lots of different spells. I had this wonderful thief spell. It's an invisibility spell with levitation, so it allowed me to go over the city walls and then go and steal things without anybody seeing me, but it also levitated my horse, so great stuff.
That's a plus.
It made me very immoral towards the end of the game, that did, but yeah. Your target audience for this first iteration of the game is 6th grade children, and the topic's mathematics. Do you have any plans to expand into different topics and with different grades?
Yeah, for sure. We've actually had a lot of people trying to get us to focus specifically on K-12 because they assume that the games will become a lot more complex as the subjects get more complicated. But we started with mathematics 6th grade, and it was the hardest challenge we thought we should do for a starter game, because it's that subject in which students usually start to struggle. So usually school is a breeze until you reach 6th grade and until you reach mathematics in 6th grade with rational numbers and with divisions and with geometry and the areas and all of that, and things start getting complicated. And this game was created because I was one of the students that struggled a lot with mathematics in 6th grade. And what I noticed is that if we don't study at home, you get a lot of questions at the end of a classroom in mathematics, and then in the next classroom you still have those questions, and then a bit more, and then more, and then more, and then more. And so this game was created so that students can go home once or twice a week, start the game, start playing the game. They should be able to complete every quest, which are basically exercises hidden inside narratives, and do them, because with the learning, with the contents, the educational contents in which we put in the game, in the dialogues and through books and through other situations, and with the knowledge he has through classroom, he should be able to complete the quests. So these are created specifically through how do I say it, with the support of a math teacher, and he's pretty confident that this will happen. But yeah, this is just mathematics 6th grade. We intend to produce one game per subject per year.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, 6th grade will have 5 games, 5th grade 5 games, and we'll go from 3rd grade, 4th grade until 6th grade in the beginning. But next year we want to be producing also for the pre-secondary education, so 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and we're pretty confident that it can reach 12th grade. In fact, we have someone that started also working with us, and which is Enea Montoli. He's a researcher from Milan, and he's doing educational RPGs as well, and he's using the 2D engine I was using before, and he's been doing physics and mathematics for 12th grade, and he has had a lot of success. And so if he can do it, we can surely do it, and we'll probably do it together. And that way we'll start.
So what are the other subjects that are upcoming then?
We'll move from mathematics again to mathematics in the 4th grade, and then science for the 6th grade and 4th grade simultaneously. We'll start with these, but because again, these are kind of hard subjects, and it will be interesting to implement those mechanisms in the game, and it will give the team the option, the possibility of challenging themselves in terms of building game mechanisms. Because when we move to English, to Portuguese, to history, games will be much easier, because it will mostly be narrative quests. Right. So for example, in English, we'll probably grab a few scenarios. We'll grab some stories from the manual, and we'll develop those stories into full-blown narratives, and create quests around that. So those are rather simple. But yeah, next will be science, and we have already built the narratives for those. And these are quite interesting. For example, 4th grade will be a game in which the student is in a spaceship reaching another planet like Earth, and he will have to develop. So basically, he's part of a colonist group who moves there, and they start developing the city and the surrounding areas, starting colonizing the planet. And so 4th grade in science will also have sustainability subjects. We'll also talk about inclusion as well. These are topics that teachers requested us to do, to introduce in the game, as well as introducing the the player into the everything in the nature. So fourth grade science here in Portugal, it's all about the connection between the person and nature and the animals and the flora. And so we will be building on that by forcing the player to start from scratch. So the planet is completely uninhabited, and then he'll start almost like a survival RPG, but without the dying part, of course.
Cool.
There's no violence ever in our games.
Right. So what would you say are the particular strengths of using this sort of gameful approach for this group of learners, or for any group of learners, really? But it'd be nice to see examples from the game you've actually built. And for this subject, so could you give me specific examples of how you've used game mechanisms to support particular learning outcomes or pedagogical approaches?
Yes, I think you'll have to run me through that question again.
Okay.
But as I can start by saying that what we're doing is basically creating a way for students to be distracted and by fun and by something that engages them as they learn. So it's not removing the learning aspect, it's embedding it into something that they find interesting. And we do that especially in harder topics. So for example, once again, in history or English or Portuguese, there's always a story behind it. And when they're learning about the story. So, and they're having fun. For example, in mathematics, that's harder to do. You can't really introduce rational numbers into a story very well. But what happens is that you create a story, and for the player to know what happens in the story, he has to study. And it becomes almost like that game exercise in which I'm sure you did that as well. I sure did, and I know a lot of people who did. Like, you want to progress through a really hard part of the game, and you don't know how. You go to the internet, or you go to the game manual, and you go to the wiki page, and you go to a forum, and you ask, and you explore, and you try to understand what's happening. Why can't you progress? What's happening? Something is missing, like a puzzle that you can solve, or a dialogue option you can't quite figure if you have to talk with that person, the other person. And so this is what we're doing is doing this, but with the subject. So for the player, he knows that it's a learning game, but he wants to know more about the story. He wants to play more. He wants to explore that part of the map, which is right now inaccessible because he's in the middle of a quest, or he wants to, like, he connected with a specific NPC, like, for example, a farmer whose house was burned down, and he has to get wood to rebuild his house. And he connected with him. Through the dialogue, he understood that he and his family were struggling, and they were freezing until he got the wood necessary to rebuild his house. And so, if that means he has to understand how much wood in fractional numbers he has to cut to get to the farmer, he'll do it. Yeah. And so this is the trick in terms of game that we use. And then we connect this with the story and with the characters, and this will allow the player to always have an objective, always have a purpose in the game, not just to reach a specific level or to conquer something, but to actually see through the story. And so, for example, Liber Domus, it's about a citizen, a small citizen, an 11-year-old kid, who's in the middle of a city, which is struggling with a lot of problems, overpopulation. There's two factions fighting each other, not actually fighting, but there's a lot of animosity. Yeah, disagreeing with each other. There's food issues. There's a fire. There's a part of the city that needs to be rebuilt. The city itself, it's in an area surrounded by mountains, and so you'll also have the option to explore beyond the mountains, and all of this is connected through a story, and so for him to progress and for him to see that the characters respect him and like him and believe he was good for the city and he did well, he'll have to go through the exercises and through the quests. And so this is how we're trying to do. Obviously, we complement this with small short-term mechanisms, like, for example, we do use achievements as well and rewards. At the end of each quest, there's rewards if he wants to do additional quests, or if an exercise, for example, imagine at a certain point a bridge has fallen and he has to rebuild the bridge, and so he goes to a carpenter and goes to a stonemason, and he starts talking with them, and they say, okay, we need this much stone and this much wood, and we need to rebuild the bridge in this angle and all of that. And so he gathers the materials, and then he talks to that person and the other person, and he builds a bridge.
So it's got a discovery-based learning then.
Yeah, basically. And this always will involve equations in this case. And so he has to understand how much wood and how much stone, and then he'll have to use angles to build the correct bridge. And this is like a mini game, the building of the bridge. And what he can do is that he can reinforce that bridge, and that will be level 2. And then I'll additionally reinforce it again, and that will be level 3. And so at the end of level 3, which is completely optional, he doesn't need to do it to move forward with the story. It's like a reinforcement mechanism, and he gets to learn a bit more and train a little bit more, and he gets an extra reward at the end. But that's because the story is already done. So that's the only it's an additional motivation for him to revise the subject, although we will be using several quests with multiple elements, in which you'll have, for example, there's most of the quests you won't focus on a specific topic, but in multiple topics at the same time, so that he can touch in several subjects at the same time and keep revisiting the subjects.
Excellent. So this month's issue of Ludogogy is particularly interested in debriefing of learning games and in the feedback mechanisms of the games themselves. So how does the games-based learning approach make it easier to have effective and fruitful debriefing after play? I mean, I'm making an assumption here that the teacher will be referring to the game. Is that the case?
It is. We will have 2 types of feedback and debriefing, and this was a major part in our building of the architecture of the games. I have to divide this into. So in the game itself, there's a lot of feedback, both positive and negative, each time that the player goes through a quest. So, for example, he has to go through to one of the elders in the city, and the player starts talking with the elder and discovers that he needs to do a quest, and the elder tells him, you need to do this quest by just remember that you have to use areas, and if you need to learn more about areas, you have this take this scroll which will give you some information, additional information about areas.
Yeah.
And this is the basic. But imagine that he goes back to the elder without finishing the quest. Okay, and so he goes back, and the elder says, the dialogue changes, and he says, "Are you struggling with the quest?" And he says, "No." "Well, then do it." Or he says, "Yes," and that's, "What's your issue with the quest? Are you struggling with areas, or is it another part of the quest?" And so on. So we have a feedback which is specific when he's struggling.
Right.
If he finishes the quest unsuccessfully, and that's an option, he will lose energy, which he will have to replenish by eating fruit, which is healthy, and yeah, and he will have to go to the elder again and retry the quest, and so the dialogue changes again, and this time the dialogue will be going a bit like, "I'm sorry to hear that you lost the quest. Do you want to try again? Maybe you should try this approach." And so the elder gives another feedback, and a reinforced feedback, like a more explanatory feedback on how we should do the quest. Excellent. During the quest itself, there will be moments. So the player has a companion. The companion has a special power. It's the only power they have, which is the ability of memorizing everything, which is quite handy.
Quite a good superpower.
Yeah, exactly. So he will always be able to additionally talk with the companion to revise the subject with additional tips, not in the form of subjects like in the scroll or what the elder will be saying, but with additional tips. "Have you tried this way? Maybe you should talk with that person before. Maybe you should try this angle." Stuff like that. So there's always this sort of feedback. And if the player fails, the companion will be the first one to say, "Don't worry, let's try again. Let's talk with the elder, and I'm sure that we'll get it right this time." And so this is our feedback mechanism inside the game, which is very reinforced so that the player doesn't get demotivated. Although there will always be the risk of failing. If they lose such an amount of energy that they don't even have enough food to replenish that energy, they will have the option to buy food. And to buy food, they have to do smaller quests. And those smaller quests will have easier exercises. And so it's like saying, okay, you've reached this part of the game, but you're struggling with the subjects. Yeah. So perhaps there's something deeper going on in terms of learning. Perhaps you missed something before. And so let's go back a bit. Don't worry, do these quests. You'll get enough money to buy a few apples, and then go back to the elder and retry the quest. But then he'll be learning a bit more about the previous subjects before, and then he'll probably be more prepared. What we're doing with the research project that has been ongoing since October last year is that we will be implementing these games with students of selected classrooms, which are accompanied by students from students and teachers, so students of education in the university.
Okay.
So these students, they're doing their masters in education, and they have 6 months in which they have to go to schools and have 2 classrooms in which they will be teaching those classrooms, and so these teachers will have the additional task because they are also researchers of telling the classroom, okay, go home, download this game and play it, and then we will talk about it in the next class. And so what we'll be trying to do is implement a blended sort of learning in which the teacher has complete knowledge because they're integrated in the research project. For example, tomorrow I will be giving a small lesson on the game based on the prototype. to bring the teachers up to speed on how the prototype is doing and how it will work. And so the teachers will have complete knowledge of how the game is. And we will also be developing videos and manuals specific for teachers so that they can use it in their classrooms. The RPG mechanisms are very interesting to work in the classrooms. And some of these teachers have actually been doing that since February this year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so for example, they use character development, they use adventure systems, they use maps, they go to some random map generator on the internet, and they create stories, and they use it in their classrooms. For example, in mathematics, they use it for distances, they use it for calculating areas. They use it for creating adventures in which they have to complete certain quests, which are exercises as well. So basically doing what we're doing in the game, but in the classroom. And so our idea is that in the future, in the next 2 years, when the games are implemented in the classrooms, is that the teachers can use it simultaneously in the classroom and at home. So, for example, if the kids play the game the day before, they'll reach the classroom with, and the teacher can ask them, "So, how is your hero doing? In which part of the game are you? Have you struggled with any part of which quest was the hardest?" And work on that. And it should be very interesting, but it is something very, very innovative. So we don't have anything to base ourselves in terms of how.
It'll be very interesting to see how it all turns out. But...
Yeah.
So when are you publishing, or when are you planning to publish?
So we plan on having 2/3 of the math game by.
No, I meant the research project.
Oh. So the research project will conclude at the end of the 2023 school year.
Okay.
But we're already thinking about an European project through Horizon. I don't know if you know the research project, and it will probably extend, if we get funding, it will probably extend another 5 years.
Wow. So a proper longitudinal study then.
Yeah.
And when's the game coming out?
So yeah, the game it's coming out hopefully until the end of September, and it will not be the full mathematics game, but will be enough for the students to play as we develop the rest, and we also focus on the science and mathematics game additional. So what happens is that we've been building the game engine, and this game engine, which is the basis of Liber Domus, can be used for any other game as long as we use the same mechanisms, and we will be using them. And so the development of the other games will be considerably easier because the engine is already built. And so we will be developing and implementing in the classroom as soon as we have enough to implement it, because the research project, they're very eager to put these games out there.
I bet. Okay. So just to go back to the sort of open world concept for a minute. So obviously that means you've had to put a lot of effort in before you even started actually building the game into building the world in which the game is going to take place. So could you tell me something about the process of world building and creating the stories that support the learning?
Yes, it was awesome. It was probably one of the most challenging things I've done mentally in terms of building the world for Liber Domus, and it has been so much fun. I think world building, it's very interesting, but at the same time can be tiresome because you have to focus on a lot of aspects. But I've been building this world for, gosh, it's been like almost a year. Yeah, it's been almost a year building this game world, and so the first thing I had to keep in mind was that it had to be really open. So I had to focus on a narrative that made sense in terms of educational game, because if I did like a story, like a regular story in which there's a game world, but the game world only exists around the story, I would be limiting the possibility of developing further exercises or further quests. And considering this game is for a full year of subject, for example, in mathematics, I was very afraid of doing something that could break in the future if I started focusing too much on specific aspects. And so all of a sudden I would run out of characters or run out of story or make the world too small. And I ended up making it too big. And so I have this world in my head, and I can say that at the end of the first trimester of quests, it will probably contain 1/10 of the world. And so probably what happens is that I will expand this to Liber Domus 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, because I ended up making this massive game. The other aspect of world building, which was a lot of fun, was that I had to remove all violence aspects, all aspects regarding death, or even using armies. Like for example, Liber Domus origin story. It's a world which is based on the Mediterranean, but in a different map. And it's based on the idea that Alexandria, the library of Alexandria, didn't burn down, and Rome wasn't sacked.
Right.
So it was, the capital was, but before that happened, and we never actually see that happening, the families from some major families from that city removed all of the books and all of the instruments and everything that was used to build on that knowledge, and ran away from the city just before it was attacked. And so there's an exodus in which they use knowledge to go through mountains and deserts and all of that until they reach Liber Domus, and they rebuild the city based on knowledge. And so this wasn't done on accident. This was done because I had to create a story in which knowledge was important.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just a story of survival or overcoming difficulties. It had to be a story on how knowledge was important for the people to overcome those problems.
So it's almost like knowledge has been lost and it's being returned to the world, sort of idea.
Yeah, basically that. So excellent. and then I moved from there to building a city. Well, if the city is based on knowledge, then we can do a geometric city in which everything makes sense. For example,
sounds like Milton Keynes.
Kind of like that, yeah. And so I started working on that, and so that when the student starts the game, it doesn't look weird that everyone is concerned about maths, because from all of the knowledge that was gathered, mathematics is the most valuable one and the most respected. So people love mathematics in the game. And there had to be a reason for that. That's why I built the world like that. And so, yeah, and from there, everything kind of came together. So I had to have a companion as well because of the knowledge, the idea that the student had to have knowledge with him always, and companions were an interesting RPG component. And so I created a backstory for the Stimos, which are the companions, and then everything else it's worked. It comes from that. So from there, I started focusing on how the exercises could be implemented. So, for example, I had to make the province around the city limited in some aspects, so that the student will have some quests to do there, in which it involved mathematics. For example, the city itself, it's very geometric, very well built. It's perfectly built almost, but there's an overpopulation issue. So everything is going so well that population is growing, obviously. And so the first one of the quests that the player has is that there's a faction of people that want to expel certain people out of there, so that there's always the same level of population, and other people that want to expand beyond the city walls, so that they can continue to grow. And this creates a lot of math problems. So, for example, there's very immediate issues with food production. And so the student will be challenged to identify food issues and identify where crops are not being as productive. For example, instead of producing apples, you can produce pears. And pears are more productive than apples, for example. I have no idea if they are. And through rationalization, they will conclude that pears are more productive. And so he asks the farmers to start producing pears. And so the food issues are resolved in the moment. And then there's the population issue. There's not enough homes for everyone. And so the player will rebuild a part of the city geometrically, so that it can accommodate as many people as possible, and that has to do with areas and volumes. And so we focused on that as well. And so yeah, everything in the game world has to be thought on how the exercises will connect with it. Yeah. It doesn't have necessarily to. So we'll also have quests and dialogues and interactions which have nothing to do with mathematics. But we don't want everything to be around mathematics. Yeah. So yeah, this was the challenge. I can't quite put it into words. Actually, I'm trying to write an article about how to create a world for educational purposes, because I think it's actually a very interesting research topic. But I'm struggling with it because I can't exactly put into words, because it's everything at the same time. It's not like I started with this and then moved on to this. It's not like I didn't start, well, I did start with the educational objectives, with a lot of discussions with teachers in what they wanted to be implemented in the game and what they didn't want to be implemented in the game, and what subjects I had to focus on. But this was like in the back part of my head when I was thinking about the world. It was always there, but it wasn't essential for the building of the world, because it has nothing to do with world building. But then, this was very lucky of me, because the world came together without having to discard the world and restart. Yeah. But it could have happened. It could have happened because it's very easy to build something that it's not adequate for educational purposes. I think I was lucky because it was my first game, and I've been thinking about this world for ages. So this world already existed in a chapter of an unpublished book I have here, but it doesn't mean that the next game will be this easy, because there's a lot of things we have to consider, and it's not just making sure that the world doesn't break when a player reaches a certain point and talks to a character that should be dead or shouldn't be there or something like that. It's not only that, it has to make sense in an educational form as well. So it's struggling, but it's a lot of fun. It's probably the most fun I've had, actually.
So getting back to what you just said about seeking the help of teachers when you were looking at the learning outcomes and so on. So how can people, teachers particularly, I guess, and other people, how can they get involved in helping you to develop the game so that it works best for their needs, and where can they go to find out more?
Well, that's actually a very good question, because we haven't thought about that as well, because I've always seen the issue on the in reverse. So how could I look for teachers that could help me build a game world and build these mechanisms and build these games? But
I'm sure there'll be people listening to this who'll go, I'm really interested in this, I want to find out more. So
yeah, well, they can find us through our webpage. The research project doesn't have a webpage yet, because things are moving a bit slowly on that end. But they can always reach me either through the webpage or through LinkedIn, or through email. And I'm always available to talk about them, either if they want to participate in building a game or adapting a game into their needs, and also in implementing RPG mechanisms in the classrooms. Because if sometimes teachers will probably be more interested in exploring some sort of mechanisms, like try a little bit each time and see how it works.
Yeah.
And so, for example, they can work with characters and create characters for the students and for themselves, and create stories around these characters. And they can use character generators. There's tons of them, and location generators. And I can give them tons of places to look and tons of tools. We actually have partnership with a lot of interesting companies that are doing very interesting products in RPG mechanisms. I don't know if I can advertise. It's not really advertising. It's just because they've provided us with free access to us and to any teacher that works with us to these tools. Like, for example, World Anvil will have the option for any teacher who works with us to build worlds for the students, and the students to build worlds with them. Incarnate, for example, has given me, I think, was 150 licenses, so that teachers can use them to build maps with the students and to build stories around these maps. And we also have Euroforge, which have created like this license, in which, because we have access to a 3D printer, if teachers have access to 3D printers, they will also be given a pro license, which they can use to build characters in 3D with their students, and then they can work with these characters and inside these maps and inside these worlds, and build all of this for a classroom. Wow. And I'm pretty sure children will absolutely love.
That's so exciting.
This. Yeah, and if they want, in terms of the game, I would very much appreciate it, because we want to expand these games everywhere. For example, Liber Domus, it's a game written in Portuguese for the Portuguese 6th grade, but the Portuguese 6th grade, it's not that different from the British 6th grade, from the Italian, the Spanish. Of course, there will be differences, but if we work with teachers, we can build on those differences. We can change quests, we can adapt, we can rearrange the narrative if necessary, because the game is very open in terms of world building, as I said earlier, and so we can adapt it.
Curriculum
quickly.
Experts welcome them.
Yeah, for sure. So that we can build the game for example, in the UK, and so you can use it, because translation isn't even an issue. The issue is obviously the educational context, making sure that the educational contents and the exercises are adequate to the UK curriculum, and that's rather easy to do, as long as teachers work with us And it's a lot of fun actually, because they can go deep into the story and try to understand. At least that's our experience so far. When teachers start understanding how how the story works with the exercises and why we do them. For example, this quest works on areas, and that quest works with areas and equations, and that quest works with rational numbers and volumes.
Yeah.
And they start thinking, yeah, okay, I can reinforce volumes here, and I can reinforce them here as well. And so it's a process that's very interesting. And so their minds start racing, and they start thinking, yeah, okay, this makes sense. This is like I do in the classroom, but just different because it's in the game. But I also do this when I tell them to do this exercise and then this one as well. This makes sense. So we always try to make sure that this is educationally adequate. Otherwise, why do just another game for fun?
Yeah.
This has to have the
To me, it
purpose.
feels like, I mean, my daughters, one of whom's 22 and the other one's 14, they used Zumbinis and also Jumpstart when they were younger to learn maths and English. And they love those games. But this feels like the next generation. This feels like, you know, a sort of a leap into the future, definitely.
We certainly hope so.
Yeah.
I think the future will be even more. How do I say this? It will be even more open world and more open-ended.
Yeah.
I think from here we'll progress into making games that are gradually more open, and so the teacher can go into their favorite role, which is to guide students,
Yeah.
which is to direct them to experiment this, try this, go explore that, and then discuss, and then evaluate and decide if what's working and what's not working. And so I have this vision that eventually we'll be able to build games with so many mechanisms inside that it's completely open-ended, like almost like Minecraft, but with the adequate information in terms of curriculum.
Yeah.
So that's Minecraft, for example. That's one of the issues I have with the game, is that it's a lot of fun. It's very interesting, but it doesn't have the educational contents, and we don't want to go there without the educational contents, without things that can support learning and can support as well teachers in the classrooms.
So I think we'll probably wrap up now, but is there anything else that you want to share about the game or your work before we go?
I think that pretty much covers everything. I really hope that we can finish this this research project and reach the conclusion that this is really working. I think what's most daunting about this is that it's very new, and my major concern and the things I actually worry about in this is that I've done some interviews with parents, and we'll definitely need to have the teachers on our side to understand and to visualize and to experiment again. So we will be giving this game free of charge to any teacher that wants it, because we want them to experiment and to use this game and to understand that we've done it with the best of the intentions in terms of educational contents. So it's not just a game for fun, and it's not something that it might be interesting, but it doesn't have the truth, the contents, the how do I say it? The necessary, yeah, exactly, for it to be valuable. We want teachers to experiment and to understand and to see with their own eyes and to experiment as they play, that it is really a good tool, so that when parents, because we've noticed that parents are really struggling with the concept, we noticed that they don't fully comprehend the difference between gamification and game-based learning.
Yeah, yeah.
And they don't understand why some games are not working. So there's a lot of games emerging and being sold to parents, and they're not cheap either,
No.
especially those subscriptions. And some of them just don't work, and they might not see the difference without teachers there to say, yeah, this makes sense. I've played this, I know this, and this makes sense. And so yeah, any teacher that wants to know more, I'm always available to answer any questions, and I'm sure there will be plenty, because I'm sure we could talk about this for a lot more time. And yeah, I think that about covers it.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really can't wait to see it all in action. So that'll be September, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Looking forward to it.
There will be a lot of videos and a lot of gameplay showing. In the meantime, we will be focusing on individual gameplay aspects as we show the game engine and what it can do, and we'll always be open about that.
Well, do feel free to share any of those as Ludogogy. I'm sure our readers would love to get involved in play sessions.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I can send you the. We will be developing a very early stage prototype, and I can send you.
Yeah.
I think that by the end of the week, and you can play and see for yourself. It is in Portuguese, but we are working on an English translation very, very quickly, and it should be available very quickly. And it will have a lot of bugs, I'm pretty sure, but these are being worked on.
September's issue is about playtesting and prototyping, so I'm
yeah,
hoping that one of the things that we'll be doing by then with Ludogogy is actually hosting playtesting sessions.
Awesome.
and play sessions. So
awesome.
If you want to come along and run one of those, that would be brilliant.
That's a very interesting challenge, because if we translate and adapt the contents to the UK mathematics 6th grade by the end of September, and translate everything to English, we can have a game session with teachers trying out the game. Yeah, for sure.
No, that was brilliant. Well, thank you very much. And yes, I'm looking forward to hearing what happens next.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.